Hello, I'm Congressman Bennie Thompson of Mississippi's 2nd Congressional District and a longtime board member of the Housing Assistance Council. I welcome you all to the 2021 National Rural Housing Conference, and I'd like to commend the Housing Assistance Council on their 50th anniversary. 40 years ago, HAC came to my little town of Bolton, Mississippi, and brought the notion that affordable housing could be provided in a rural area just like other parts of America. So for the last 50 years, quality housing in rural America has been challenging, but nonetheless, we've been able to accomplish it for so many families because of the Housing Assistance Council. Low to moderate income families oftentimes find themselves within circumstances that prevent them from attaining affordable, safe, and quality housing. HAC has always been there when we needed them. That's why I'm so happy that we are celebrating 50 years, because for whatever reason, the HACs of the world have made families much safer because of their work in rural America. So oftentimes we assume that everyone has running water, insulation, and just sufficient housing. But many families are forced to preserve and survive through many disheartening challenges every day. If you've ever seen the face of a family that moves into a new home, you understand what I mean by that expression. So the Housing Assistance Council, let me thank you for a job well done, but let me also say that our work is not complete. We still have more work to do, but for the first 50 years, the work that you've done speaks for itself. So I look forward to another 50. Congratulations, Housing Assistance Council.
I want to give a big shout out to the Housing Assistance Council. Congratulations on celebrating your 50th anniversary this year. You know, the work that you do in addressing housing affordability and rural poverty is so important and so needed, especially in rural America. You are truly working to try to make the world a better place for a whole lot of people. So for all of you out there who are helping the Housing Assistance Council fulfill its mission, this next song is especially for you. Here's What a Wonderful World.
Wow, what a powerful way to kick off today's conference. Hey, everybody, my name is David Lipsett, CEO of the Housing Assistance Council. And to say I'm excited about the next couple of days would be a huge understatement. I'm looking at the chat go by this morning, and like Crystal from North Carolina said, starting any morning with a little Bob Thompson is a fantastic morning. So first, please join me and blues fan Bennie Thompson in giving Bob Thompson a virtual round of applause. So people of all backgrounds and talents make up rural America. Bob Thompson got to West Virginia State College about 10 years before my family arrived down at West Virginia Tech. We lived up the Kanawha River from him. He was making music that was going up the Billboard jazz charts. The guy's a phenomenal treasure. I'm excited to hear the other day that he's going to get back on the Charleston Mountain stage with public radio later this month to host his annual Joy to the World show. If you're anywhere close by there, get there. It's a fantastic tradition. Hope everyone gets a chance to see it. So, and of course, thank you to Congressman Thompson. You've been an ally and a partner for HAC since you joined our board, as you said, way back while serving as the mayor of Bolton. You're a leader back home. You're a leader here, out the window here in DC. You spent a career helping people, and we're super proud at HAC to call you a friend, a board member, and someone who helps us in all times and times of need. So now, without further ado, welcome to the 2021 National Rural Housing Conference. My hope is that the next couple of days can inspire you and remind you we have a community who share your work in housing and community development. You're among friends here at the HAC conference. Look at the names that go by in the chat, and you're going to see people you recognize. We also know that you're working hard, and taking the time out of your work to join us for a couple of days is no small commitment. So thank you so much for that. We think you can't hear thank you for what you do nearly enough. And seeing this collection of names go by reminds me how great it is to see folks. It's what makes this conference, this event we have every couple of years, super exciting for me, and I hope you. The connections we make and renew at every conference are invaluable. You can see, and hopefully we see it again this year in the rooms where loan officers are talking to policymakers and self-help specialists meeting with community design professionals. I promise you at some point you're going to find yourself in one of these virtual rooms with dozens of folks, all with their own particular expertise and experience, and hopefully recognize that all of us is here working toward the same goals. So please introduce yourself to the people around you. Reach out, trade emails, share what you know. We'll all be better for it. And when I say all, we've got over 500 people with us here today. 44 states are represented. We got folks from US Virgin Islands and DC. And I got to warn you, it's a packed agenda. So buckle up. It's going to be a fun ride, I hope. We've got over 40 expert panels to choose from, 2 cabinet secretaries and a dozen members of Congress talking about rural housing. We've got their attention today and over the next couple days. We've got plenaries that will hopefully be food for the soul. And like we've started our tradition recently, and as you saw Bob play there, we're weaving all kinds of good music into this year's event. We got guitar and piano and fiddle and drumming, a young poet's spoken words. I think we got to try to keep things fun in this virtual world. And I will come back to the idea of the virtual conference a bit here, but I just want to say I really look forward to gathering with you live and in person, honest to goodness, in the hallways and event spaces of this thing we set up called the Virtual Conference Central. So, you know what? This year we do have a record number of new HAC conference attendees. Welcome, folks. We always like to try to make you connected to your colleagues from around the country. We're super excited to see you here, with a few grumpy exceptions, and I think you know who you are. You can note that you've joined with a pretty friendly bunch of folks here. So we will make sure to get you colleagues and connections for your career for years to come. And for those who are a little less familiar with HAC, we started 50 years ago with a War on Poverty grant. We grew up through the civil rights era, Since then, we expanded our operations to become one of the nation's leading sources of information on rural communities. We also lend money at pretty good rates and put on trainings. And all of this work is to help small towns and rural places build and maintain quality, affordable housing. Our goal is to have organizations like yours, partners, friends of ours, thrive and have high capacity so that you can get the work done. We keep our headquarters here in DC so that we can use what we're learning with you and local community organizations to inform Congress, HUD, and USDA on sound social policy. So HAC's work is stretched all across rural America. We do have a focus on areas of persistent poverty, including southwest border colonias, Appalachia, Indian country, the Delta, rural South, and every single place a farm worker calls home. So I do want to stop for a moment. I owe a bunch of thank yous to folks that made this event possible. First and foremost, of course, thank you to the HAC board. Our board of directors has provided continued support and a deep commitment to this organization. Folks like Bennie Thompson, who've been on for decades, and others who have just joined us. We've gotten this place really kicking. We've got you to thank for it. We're growing, we're strong, and your help has been invaluable. And I also want to thank our partners and sponsors. It's folks like this who make an event possible. Proud to be working with the Home Depot Foundation, USDA, Wells Fargo Housing Philanthropy. Thank you, thank you. NeighborWorks America, our friends over there, really appreciate your help. Truist, AARP Foundation. I'm going on, the list is long. Bank of America, Morgan Stanley, Federal Home Loan Bank System, National Cooperative Business Association. Thank you all so much. Tennessee HDA, really appreciate you kicking in. NACIDA, good friends just down the street. FAHI, our friends in Appalachia. The Reinsurance Association of America, NCAL. It's remarkable how many folks are supporting and helping all of us gather. We've also got a number of sponsors who kicked in to provide scholarships for those who needed it to be able to attend. So thank you to those folks. Greystone, Fannie Mae, Melville Charitable Trust. We appreciate your helping folks get to the conference. So I also, a quick moment to just thank Center for Rural Strategies and SALTA with us. We couldn't ask for two better partners in helping create this rich virtual environment. Thanks, of course, to all our speakers, our panelists, our partners who help inform and fill up this week's agenda. And most importantly, and closest to my heart, thanks to the HAC staff. Your creativity, your determination, your countless hours putting together this event have been invaluable. And I hope it shows the crowd of folks who are assembled how much folks here at HAC really want our community partners and friends to succeed. Thank you so much. And of course, I want to thank all of you for committing time and energy to be here. I hope you give and gain from the experience. All right, a moment's pause. So here we are, Wednesday morning. One of the really exciting things about this conference is 2021, as the congressman noted, marks HAC's 50th anniversary. 50 years working with thousands of organizations like yours to help create over 70,000 homes across every state and territories. We invested over $340 million into organizations that build homes in rural communities, provided over 200,000 hours of training, and published countless reports that inform the work we all do to house America's rural families. It's fun. It's fun for us. I hope it's fun for you to celebrate an anniversary like this. It certainly has prompted us to look back on the lessons that we've learned with you for the last 50 years. But more importantly, it's a calling for us to form a vision for the 50 years to come. You heard the congressman challenge us to do that. So really ask yourself, what is it that we should try to get done by 2071? I know it seems far in the future, but please take that moment, think through it as you're going through this conference. How can I apply this work to a vision that gets us where we want to go, with safe, decent, affordable places for everyone in town to live. It's a vision for the year 2071 in which we believe people can feel at home and connected in their communities, and rural America is a vital part of the fabric of the nation. Of course, in order to achieve that vision, we're all going to need to expand our efforts, build the capacity of more rural housing providers, increase our lending in hard-to-reach places, expand our data analysis to inform local, regional, state, federal policy, and build strategies that improve rural communities. I really firmly believe we're not going to get there by everyone here working harder and faster. I'd venture to guess if you made it here and tuned in today, you're already putting in tons of hours, plenty of sweat equity that you're putting into your work. I think we're going to get there by working together to pull resources in from every direction. We need to expand the community of people who see rural interests as their own. If we want this country running all cylinders by 2071, we better make darn well sure that every American community has the opportunity to enjoy the economic, social, and civic richness that this country has produced. What does your 50-year vision look like? Seriously, try to think about it over the next couple days of the conference. What do you think rural communities could look like in 2071? What needs to happen to achieve that vision? But thinking it's not the whole deal, you need to share that vision with the rest of us by visiting a site we just set up called vision2071.org. We set it up to shape the vision, to get input, to get all of us to continue the kind of work we're going to do this week, and identify ways we can work together to achieve it. Over the next several months, as we meet and interact on vision2071.org, we're going to publish stories. We'll talk about best practices. We'll explore what local organizations need to address their community housing challenges. We'll lift your voices up, pull you together, and combine to create a strong vision together. And then it's not important enough to just have a vision. Over the next 3 years, HAC is committed to raising funds and capital to help all of us pursue the vision. We're going to build up funds for lending, funds to pass through as grants. We're going to fund needed research and deepen our partnerships with local organizations so that we all have the tools needed to grow stronger together and build the capacity of our organizations. Our success depends on each other. So I hope you join us for that effort on vision2071.org. Of course, it isn't easy to think about a vision for the future while we're still in a period of immense uncertainty and pain and suffering. Since the last HAC conference, you remember way back in December 2018 what the world was like? Since then, COVID's hit our communities pretty hard. Rural America has faced supply shocks and job loss, evictions, and most importantly, the death of over 100,000 of our rural neighbors, co-workers, friends, and for myself and others, family members. And tragically, that pandemic is still far from over. COVID has greatly increased housing insecurity in rural America. It's affected our lives and our work. At its height, over 20% of tenants were behind on their rent. 1 out of every 8 homeowners was behind on their mortgage. Do you know, I know 8 homeowners. I know folks who are deeply affected by this and are needing the ways to be able to claw back to stability in their rent and their mortgages. This is tens of millions of families, our families, our neighbors, our tenants, our friends. And of course, it's not just the folks who are living there. The owners, the landlords were hurt. They saw declining income, which made it harder to pay mortgages and maintenance and management of property. Yet, even in talking to many of you during the tragedy of the last couple years, you've been telling me countless stories of resilience in our communities and in the organizations that serve them. We've seen groups that barely had an online presence to move all the way to full work from home and provide high quality housing counseling on the phone and online. Gosh darn it, overcoming rural cell service and internet speeds. We've seen groups figure out ways to manage construction crews on site that are maintaining social distance. You're meeting with clients, tenants, home buyers in settings that are safe, that you've set up as a way to keep doing business despite the odds. We've been taking a lot of that learning into our latest issue of Rural Voices and into the work that we're doing here. You can see hopefully an image up there on the screen. And in there, you're going to see how organizations like yours adapted to this moment. I find it to be a fascinating and powerful read. Hopefully it collected all the work that we've been seeing you do, and you can get to that stuff on our website, as it says there on the screen. So, we in a setting like this, we got to recognize COVID is not the only thing that has fundamentally shifted our world since the last HAC conference. Again, thinking back to where we stood and how we did this some years ago, as you know, the nation has entered into a moment of reckoning on systemic racism. Protests and boycotts, challenges to statues and street names, calls for corporations and government to recognize their contributions to the systemic inequality that exists today. All of that action marking a collective stand by the folks who are doing it for parity and dignity for Black, Brown, and Indigenous lives. Our vision, that one that we are thinking about for our 50-year future, for stronger communities, must be rooted in that history and address the centuries of injustice. Diversity, equity, inclusion are at the heart of what affordable housing is meant to do. It's the result of yours and our work. The HAC conference always has a cohort of researchers doing their smarty research thing and their research panels. And if you take a look at their work, together they've shown how stable, affordable, quality housing is among the most powerful predictors of family wealth, health, success in school, upward mobility through work. And housing is the most powerful tool for building family wealth that can be passed to the next generation. Of course, those same researchers are revealing for us how a variety of American communities have been systemically excluded from the benefits of home ownership and quality housing. Our vision, collectively, together, must work to correct that injustice, to help people build opportunities today through housing when they have long been denied that chance. Race is central, an often complex component of our national identity and history. Rural and small town areas have traditionally not been as racially or ethnically diverse as the nation overall. The location and concentration of minorities in rural areas and small towns differs too. Many rural minorities are clustered geographically in regions closely tied to historical, social, and economic dynamics. There are more than 2,000 rural and small town census tracts where racial and ethnic minorities make up the majority of the population. Every 10 years, when we take a look at the census data and put much of it out in our Taking Stock publication, our analysis from the 2020 data finds that rural America, like the nation as a whole, is more racially diverse. Rural Hispanic and Asian populations both grew by 20% last decade. Meanwhile, white, Black, and Native populations declined since 2010, though most of those researchers are pointing out that there is an astounding 148% increase in the data collected at the census of rural people identifying as multiracial. It's an important factor in these shifts. So alongside racial inequity, our vision for an equitable America must also address the widening inequality between regions of the country, which has raised grave economic and political concerns, which we have watched play out on our screens over the last many months. We've seen a hyper concentration of wealth and economic mobility in a handful of sprawling metro regions, it's limited the opportunity elsewhere. It's left broad swaths of the country impoverished and unable to access the capital it takes to develop and maintain prosperous places. Housing is, of course, at the heart of that story too, though not the kind of housing most of us at this conference build, manage, and maintain. Median sale prices for a home in rural America have remained largely flat for 20 years, modest gains since COVID notwithstanding. Meanwhile, the sale price of an urban and suburban house over that same time has nearly doubled. I do explore a bunch of this in a chapter of the book we just published with the Federal Reserve called Investing in Rural Prosperity. Oh, good. It's up on the screen there. A bunch of folks who are at the conference today, you'll see that they contributed chapters as well. Find them in the chat and talk about it. And I will thank you to the Federal Reserve. They've generously offered to send every single person registered for the HACC conference a copy of the book. So please look for it in the mail in the weeks to come. And knowing that we have a large group of HUD, USDA, Treasury, and other federal policymakers, alongside with some congressional staff attending, I want to raise up one of the points in the chapter on housing. It'll come as no surprise that federal policy is cited as a main driver of that racial and geographic inequality I just described. But what I hope our friends note is that we are not talking about the 60s or a system in place during our parents' day. Today's financial services regulations and the home mortgage system are fueling trillions in wealth in some regions, but not others. Affordable housing and market rate housing in the nation's hottest markets are the most heavily subsidized. Even if we're going to get ahead of the unequal effects of the policies and programs our federal friends are managing, we've got to stop putting fuel on the fire of high-cost markets while dampening the demand and supply in small towns and rural places. Why? Because it depresses national economic growth. And it also sends a message to rural Americans that if we want to pursue economic opportunity, if we and our children want to be able to do that, then we must move away from the places we call home. Thankfully, there are folks in the new administration that are starting to recognize the federal role in causing urban and suburban and rural divides. On day one, I was thrilled to see President Biden sign an executive order saying his administration would pursue a comprehensive approach to equity, infusing it into all areas of the federal government's work. What I loved about it is he included geographic equity as part of this pledge and specifically called out the needs in rural areas. I encourage the financial sector folks and philanthropy who are with us today to make similar commitments. Please consider the impact of your investment on the nation's economic geography. When you invest in rural communities, the whole nation benefits, including equity, diversity, inclusion in that vision for 2071. Of course, does not make this easy, but it's absolutely necessary. We know it's going to be hard work, and we're going to have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. It's the way that we can ensure that we stay on the path our vision sets for the next 50 years in rural America. So hopefully all of this has provided you some food for thought as you attend this year's conference. The challenge now is to build toward a new normal, one that is more full of opportunity and resources for the work that we all do in developing affordable housing in small towns and rural places. With that, I want to wrap it up. We talked about a shared vision. We recognize challenges before us, and now we have a conference ahead of us to build on what we know, connect, reconnect, and expand our community. This conference is going to seem a little different if it doesn't already. Like me, you're probably sitting at home in the home office, possibly with your tennis shoes still on. Yep. But a chance to have a conference like this is still a chance to learn and grow and connect. We're going to do it all through what we call our Conference Central. In it, you're going to control a small avatar and walk around the virtual conference spaces. When you get close up to someone. You're going to see and hear them like you would on a Zoom, Teams, or call, walking back and forth and seeing different folks. We're trying really hard to replicate the spaces that you would have in an in-person conference. If you need to meet or talk when you find somebody in Conference Central, you're going to see that there are private meeting spaces and other nooks and crannies throughout the space. So if we captured that feeling of being in DC at the conference hotel, you're also going to see there's plenty more to see and do in this Conference Central. For example, one of my favorites is you can visit a virtual exhibition of There Is More Work to Be Done. It's a photographic celebration of the work and impact and struggle for equitable, affordable, and stronger communities in rural America. It was inspired by the work of photographer George Ballas. It's remarkably powerful stuff, and I can't wait for you to see it. And hey, there's a virtual town square, which has a beach and yes, a tiki bar. So a little different than the bar in the hotel or the lobby, but check it out. It's a great place to hang. And of course, if you run into any trouble while you're meandering about, you'll find hack staff will be in the Conference Central wearing bright yellow top hats. And of course, when you're done socializing and meeting in the hallways, please look to the app that we developed for the conference. You can find it in the Apple, Microsoft, and Google Play stores by searching for Hack, NRHC. The app is where you find all the important information you need: the daily schedules, the agenda, what panels you need to race to go find, announcements, and certainly more ways to connect with your conference friends. I was playing around with it yesterday and found out that we have a virtual photo booth. Who knew? So go take a couple of selfies and videos. I posted my favorite part about being in a virtual conference together. So we also would ask that, because nothing happens on a single channel anymore, that you engage with us on social media as well, using the hashtag #BuildingRural. Tweet and post about the moments you inspire you here, what you're excited for, whatever you want to tell the world about the work we're doing here this week. So I hope we've done everything we can to keep you learning and having fun over the next couple of days. I barely even talked about the 40 plus workshops that you're going to be attending and tons of incredible speakers. So please sit up, start typing and meandering your avatars and connecting with folks. And I hope you enjoy the show, which of course brings us to our first plenary. As I said earlier, President Biden signed an executive order on his first day in office. It said that his administration would pursue a comprehensive approach to equity. He also included a comprehensive definition of the underserved communities for which equity has been denied: Black, Latino, Native American communities, persistent poor communities, and rural places, to name just a few. Obviously, the first step to addressing inequality is to acknowledge it, as we are doing so. Our communities are faced by incredible challenges, but this moment, I'm hoping, provides incredible opportunity. As I've said before, that if rural areas are to gain increased attention in public policy and popular discourse, then our raising those questions of geographic inequality for federal policy making has to be done. This new administration has brought us to the cusp of historic investments in our communities, some of it already coming through the infrastructure bill that's been passed and signed. As we seek to harness the potential of these investments for small towns and rural places, it's critical that we understand how leaders at the highest level of government want to work with us, the rural community development crowd. So hopefully this plenary gives us a chance to hear from two leaders in the new administration: Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Marcia Fudge, and Secretary of Agriculture, Tom Vilsack. I'm glad we had a chance to speak to both. After all, we can't work with our federal partners to combat inequality and strengthen our communities if we don't hear directly from them, their priorities and their vision. So far, this administration has included rural communities amongst its priorities, but where does it go from here? What comes next? How does that rubber hit the road? And how are communities such as ours going to be involved in the day-to-day acts of governing? The goal of this conference is to connect us with each other and national experts, equip us with the tools we need, and to inspire our work reimagining the future of rural communities. I can't think of a better way to start off the plenary with Secretary Marcia Fudge. So we're honored to be joined today by the Secretary of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Throughout her career, Secretary Fudge has worked to help low-income families, seniors, and community across the country. She served as the congressperson for the 11th Congressional District, my home state of Ohio, back from 2008 to 2021. She was a member of several congressional caucuses, past chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, and served on the House Agriculture Committee, introducing her to many of the programs that we use to develop the communities in which we work. Before her service on the federal level, Secretary Fudge was truly in the weeds of community development as a mayor in our state of Ohio. In 1999, Secretary Fudge was elected the first female and first African-American mayor of Warrensville Heights. It's up near Cleveland. I say up because I'm from down near Columbus. But when she held the position, she held it for 2 terms. And as mayor, as you guys know, she had to deal with the deep structural changes to the economy. She even adopted one of the nation's first vacant and abandoned property ordinances. She worked with local officials. She developed a task force to protect against predatory lending, and she secured the inclusion of property maintenance grants in her revitalization action plan. She's done the nuts and bolts hard work on the ground that housers like us truly appreciate. And she brought new residential development to the city while other areas were suffering around the state. She was able to address the foreclosure crisis actively. As a former mayor, she's seen it firsthand. So we welcome Secretary Fudge, appreciate her sharing updates on HUD's rural housing priorities, the historic level of pandemic housing assistance, and the challenges and opportunities federal programs experience in serving rural places.
Thank you, President Lipsetz. My thanks as well to the entire leadership and membership of the Housing Assistance Council for all you do to improve the lives of rural Americans. I'm pleased to join HAC in celebrating your 50th anniversary. For 5 decades, your organization has helped create affordable housing for rural communities in greatest need, from central Appalachia to the Mississippi Delta, from Indian country to border colonias. The Biden-Harris administration is proud to serve and stand as your ally and advocate. In many ways, our work together is more important than ever before. Even before the pandemic, more than 2 million rural families spent more than half their incomes just to put a roof over their heads. COVID-19 only made things worse. We know as well that rural Americans who suffered most during this pandemic were people of color, particularly Black and Indigenous people. That is why, since his first days in the White House, President Joe Biden has focused on advancing security and opportunity for rural communities. The President's American Rescue Plan provided more than $8 billion in vital relief to healthcare providers who service vulnerable households in rural America. This administration took additional actions to help rural hospitals stay open, support rural businesses that fell behind as a result of COVID, and ensured rural communities had access to vaccines. The President understands that helping the American people weather this pandemic is only one part of the task before us. We have the added responsibility and the great opportunity to forge an America that is stronger, fairer, and more prosperous than ever before. We must build back better. Last month, the President signed into law the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. It truly is a landmark piece of legislation. The President's infrastructure law is a blue-collar blueprint to revitalize our nation. It will put millions of Americans to work in good-paying jobs, to repair and upgrade our roads, railways, and bridges, replace every lead pipe in America, and provide every family in America with access to affordable broadband. Right now, 35% of rural America lacks access to high-speed internet at home. This means that millions of our children are falling behind because they cannot learn remotely. The bipartisan infrastructure law will change that. While the president's infrastructure plan is a really big deal, this administration is not done working on behalf of the American people. Far from it. The president has proposed a once-in-a-generation plan known as Build Back Better. Build Back Better contains the single largest and most comprehensive investment in affordable housing in American history. It will provide $150 billion to create, preserve, and restore more than 1 million affordable homes in rural communities, small towns, big cities, and tribal nations. Build Back Better will help hundreds of thousands of people purchase their first homes and build a source of wealth they can pass down to their children and their children's children. It will address the major capital needs facing our public housing and provide life-changing rental assistance to hundreds of thousands of families. In addition, Build Back Better represents the greatest effort to combat climate change and extreme weather events that our nation has ever made. Your communities understand why this work is so critical. Natural disasters hurt rural Americans in every corner of the country. Floods have destroyed crops and disrupted livestock operations throughout the Midwest and Southern Plains. Droughts have devastated farmers and ranchers in places like California, New Mexico, and the Dakotas. The president realizes we cannot wait to protect the American people from the extreme weather events made worse by climate change. Build Back Better invests more than $50 billion to safeguard vulnerable communities from disasters like wildfires and flash floods. In addition, it will put our nation on the path to cut greenhouse gas pollution by more than a gigaton by the end of this decade. In the process, it will create hundreds of thousands of jobs by investing in a 21st century clean energy economy. This includes initiatives centered around America's farmlands and climate-smart practices across our lands and waters. Moving forward, HUD will continue to center our work around the guiding principle of equity. We will ensure that those in greatest need of assistance, including rural Americans, are the first to receive it and that they get their fair share. We know that 1 out of every 5 Americans who experience homelessness lives in a rural community. Homelessness has no place in this administration's vision for America. That is why we have launched a major initiative called House America. It will empower state, local, and tribal leaders to put our nation on the path toward ending homelessness using the unprecedented investments in the American Rescue Plan. I am proud to say more than 30 leaders have now joined House America. Their communities span our entire nation, from the state of California to the state of Maine, from the Cherokee Nation to Chattanooga, Tennessee. HUD will recruit more leaders to join our initiative. We want every community in our nation to become a House America partner. HUD will always work with intentionality to help improve the lives of people in need. When I reflect upon the work ahead of us, I think about the words of civil rights activist Cesar Chavez, who once said, "Grant me courage to serve others, for in service there is true life." Together, let us continue to find our purpose in our commitment to service. Let us continue to take bold actions that expand opportunity for rural Americans with courage, with confidence, and with conviction. The Biden-Harris administration is proud to work alongside the members of the Housing Assistance Council, and I cannot wait to see all the great things we accomplish together. Thank you very much and have a wonderful conference.
Thanks, Secretary Fudge. That was fantastic. I really appreciate you joining us. Appreciate the increase in title to President Lipsett. Wonder where that came from. But seriously, I'm grateful that you've been an ally, friend, someone who we've talked to. You've joined us several times since joining the administration, and advocated for the folks that we are working with all the time in rural America. I couldn't agree more that the responsibility and opportunity before us is to forge, as you said, stronger, fairer, and more prosperous America. All of us have been striving towards that vision of our communities since we first started working to house our neighbors. And yet this moment, as you know, has made our work even more necessary. Problems our communities face are not new. We've talked about this directly. You've joined hack webinars to discuss this. All of the challenges of COVID have built upon shortcomings that had existed for decades, upon injustices our nation ignored for too long. It's why the effects of the virus have been particularly hard on Black and Hispanic communities, tribal nations, and persistent poor areas. I'm looking at the chat, trying to respond and do this and watch the secretary stuff. I mean, there are points here that I see going by where folks are pointing out how the system is not well structured to serve many of the communities. And once I can get off this and get back to the chat, I'll answer some of those questions. Thanks a bunch for pointing out. And I can see a bunch of the West Coast folks are joining us online now too. So good morning, welcome. But I do think about that phrase a lot, that a rising tide lifts all boats. It's a great concept, but it isn't a guarantee. If you're anchored in place, a rising tide just isn't helpful. It can be devastating. It can take other places much higher than you are able to float. So for decades, there have been several rural regions and tribal nations that have been left out of harnessing that American rising tide. Equity, including equity for rural and underserved areas, is that stated priority. Thank you, Secretary Fudge. So it is with much excitement that we can also turn toward the next person in the president's cabinet who's going to join us and talk to us, complicating all the challenges we've discussed, a lack of reliable rural data, obscures some rural realities. These are not easy challenges. It's why I'm excited that I had a chance to sit down with USDA Secretary Tom Vilsack to discuss them. We're honored today to be joined by Secretary Tom Vilsack from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. For those watching, Secretary Vilsack was nominated by President Joe Biden to return to a role where he served for 8 years under President Barack Obama. Under Secretary Vilsack's leadership, USDA is building back better, restoring the American economy, strengthening rural and historically underserved communities, responding to threats of climate change, creating good-paying jobs for American workers, and the next generation of agricultural leaders, investing in our kids and our families. I had the pleasure of serving under Secretary Vilsack when he served in the same role under President Obama. Prior to that, he served a couple of terms as governor of Iowa, served in the Iowa State Senate, and came to there from the lovely town of Mount Pleasant, Iowa, where he was mayor. Secretary Vilsack joins me today for an armchair discussion on rural America. We welcome him and appreciate him joining us in the conversation. Secretary Vilsack.
Well, it was great to be with you today. And let me just first and foremost thank you and all those who are connected to the Housing Assistance Council for the incredible work that you're doing in focusing on home ownership and the ability for people to have a decent place to live, whether it's the lending capacity that you have or the research you do, or the technical assistance and policy development that you all are engaged in. It really is making a difference. And we certainly have appreciated the partnership at USDA with the council. So I look forward to our conversation today on something that is probably as fundamental to the American dream as anything I could think of, which is home ownership and the ability to have a good place to live.
All right. Well, let's dive right into one of the things that President Biden did on day one as he walked in with you and his cabinet to focus on equity, including equity for rural, persistently poor, underserved areas. By stating that as a priority on day one for a new administration, that gave us tremendous relief joy. We're ready to get going, ready to work on those issues. And when he put it in his executive order, it signaled to agencies that they had work to do here on questions of equity and inclusion, especially for us dealing or working with small towns on geographic equity. So can you talk to us a little bit about what's been happening at the department and how we can look for changes in rural development along these lines?
Well, I'd say a couple of things. First and foremost, there's probably no more department in the federal government that needs to focus on issues of equity than the Department of Agriculture. Obviously, we have had a history, which we're not particularly proud of discriminatory practices. And I think it is important for us at USDA to take a look at ourselves and ask the question, what can we do and what must we do to improve in this area to make the USDA a fairer and more equitable place? We are doing an internal review, and we're also appointing an equity commission, which is going to be an outside look at our activities. In the meantime, I think our team understands that the executive order the president has signed and the purpose of it, and understands the absolute imperative for us at USDA. So we're doing a number of things. We're making sure that everything that we do goes through an equity lens. So for example, when we look at rural development, we know that we have a series of competitive programs where people have to make application for resources. And sometimes there are more applications than there are resources. And so we have to make choices. Well, one of the choices, the choice now can be focused in part on equity, because we're asking folks and we're providing additional points, if you will, for competitive grants or activities that are impacting rural areas and impacting equity. And so creating a new scoring system and creating an opportunity for persistently poor areas, which oftentimes have high minority populations, to have a little bit of a leg up in that competition, make sure that our resources that we have can be directed in the right place. Secondly, we're also recognizing that at times some of our programs have match requirements. And that's easy for relatively well-to-do rural areas that may live on the outskirts of a metropolitan area or may have a thriving industry or business. But it is much more difficult when you're dealing with communities in Appalachia or the Delta or the Colonias or in some tribal areas. And so it's important for us to look for ways in which we can lessen that burden. You know, on the housing side, we took to heart the important role that we play in making sure that we recover from the pandemic and making sure that the pandemic didn't disproportionately impact and affect rural areas. So when the American Rescue Plan provided $100 million of emergency rental assistance, we got those resources obligated as quickly as possible to help over 30,000 rent overburdened tenants be able to keep their apartment, keep their living space without having to worry about whether or not they were going to be asked to leave. We did the same thing with the resources provided for home ownership assistance. And then we focused our attention on the folks who really have the resources to help people, which are state and local leaders. They were provided a substantial amount of resource to assist. And we wanted to make sure that governors, mayors understood and appreciated that those resources needed to be put to work and needed to be put to work quickly, and that they shouldn't forget rural areas. So I made personal inquiries and personal communications with those leaders to make sure they understood their important role and to make sure that they took advantage of the Treasury's rental assistance programs, home ownership programs, so that they could avoid foreclosures and folks losing their homes.
Thanks for that. I continue to marvel at such a huge department. And yes, some of the rural housing service programs are quite big in your portfolio. But to be conversive on everything from trade to ag subsidy to you name it, and to be able to talk about housing, it's really appreciated here in our small niche industry of affordable housing. So thank you for that. For us, the part of that context, my organization's been working in the most persistently poor places with Black and Indigenous and people of color communities, and yet that's not necessarily the narrative. That poverty is not always seen as living in rural. You described it really well. There are places that are wealthy. There are places vibrant and prospering. There are others that there's very little way out or up. And when we concentrate in those areas, we really need resources to adjust to a dysfunctional market. And yet here comes some new narrative, right? COVID's pushing families and others supposedly into some rural places. And so we're seeing a bit of a growth and a change in that narrative. But if you could run through for folks something that I loved that you did in the previous administration, we worked together, where you'd say, we need to talk to Americans about what we're doing, what the right role of government is and how well we're doing it, because we do have some programs who work. We need to be selling them. We need to be increasing them. We need to be stewarding them really well. And I always loved how you talked to that.
Well, I was struck on Sunday when Governor Sununu from New Hampshire on one of the talk shows basically suggested that Washington was totally broken and that there was only hope at the state and local level. I thought to myself, I just got the fiscal numbers from our various mission areas of the work that was done at USDA to help provide folks. So let me just give you an example. There were 127,000 home loans or guaranteed home loans done by the USDA folks during the fiscal year that ended September 30th of this year. That's 127,000 families that have the opportunity to own their own home and to begin accumulating some equity in that home and some wealth connected to that home. 127,000 folks, families. I mean, so that's probably 500,000 people. Well, that's federal government working where no one else was providing help and assistance. There were about 54,000 farm families that received credit to be able to continue to maintain and operate and own their farms. Now, these are folks who could not get credit anywhere else. But for the Department of Agriculture, they probably wouldn't be in the farming business. So with all due respect to the governor, I just don't think he doesn't know what he doesn't know about the reach of the Department of Agriculture. The statistics are just remarkable. But having said that, you put your finger on a very important aspect of rural America, which is people, when they think of poverty in this country, I think they immediately think of inner city poverty. And totally understand why they think that. But the reality of poverty is that there's probably deeper and more persistent poverty in rural areas, in part because we've allowed the economy of rural America to be an extraction economy and not a circular one. And by this, what I mean by this is, if you think about what we've done in rural America, we basically take things from the land or out of the land or below the land, and we transport them to some other place where value and opportunity is added, where the jobs are created, where the businesses are created, and we convert those things that rural Americans either grew or mined into something more valuable that helps to stimulate the overall economy. But almost all the real opportunity is someplace else. So what we have to do is we have to say, wait a second, if we're going to take something off the land, then we need to convert it here in rural America to create the opportunity here. And I think, frankly, the climate, as difficult as that challenge is, creates an enormous opportunity for us to really change the economy of rural places. And so we're investing at Department of Agriculture in these climate opportunities. We're creating opportunities for farmers, for example, to benefit from conservation practices that create more carbon sequestration and storage. We look forward to paying, if you will, farmers to embrace those practices so they in turn can go out in the private market and obtain carbon credits, an additional income source, that they can take agricultural waste and convert it in a bioprocessing facility located in rural America, funded by the USDA, to convert it into a fuel or a fiber or a material or a chemical, all of which will help us create that circular economy and frankly also do significant, have a significant benefit from a climate perspective. So rural development is now looking at ways in which it can ensure that these opportunities don't just occur again in those places that have their act together and have had success over a long period of time, but that we focus these efforts as well, and very, very focused in a targeted way in these areas that are persistently poor. Now, how do we do that? Well, we have to recognize that there's the folks who live in those areas have not had much success accessing USDA programs for a multitude of reasons, and very well may not trust the USDA or departments of government. So we have to create a bond, a connection. So we're looking at ways in which we can create teams of people at USDA that go into local areas, persistently poor areas, establish themselves, if you will, with community building organizations that have the trust and confidence of people in the local community, and then begin to say, what do we need to do together to create this new economy? How can we help you get to a better place? And here are the programs that are available at USDA. Here's how you apply. Here's how you're successfully apply. Let's work together to make this happen. There's some real opportunities in the Build Back Better framework that is being debated now by the Senate. There's a provision in there. In the scheme of things, it's $1 billion program, which in the scheme of things doesn't sound like a lot when you're talking about trillions of dollars. But I think it has a profound opportunity to literally send a message to these persistently poor areas that, in fact, hope is on its way. It's the Rural Partnership Initiative. And essentially what it would do is it would create the resources to provide the technical assistance for rural areas to understand how to access all the wide variety of federal programs that exist today among many departments. Develop a strategic vision for how to transform the economy to a more successful economy, and ultimately provide resources and capital, which is often missing, to make that vision happen. Now, how does that impact housing and things that the council's interested in? Here's the reality. If you have an economy that's working, if you've got jobs where people are being paid a decent wage and our small businesses are being developed, then you're going to have people that can afford to buy and stay in homes. You're going to have folks who can afford to pay rent in a multifamily living arrangement. So the reality here is that by building that strengthening that economy, you create more opportunity for home ownership that is actually sustainable. And so we're looking at ways in which we can penetrate in those persistently poor areas, develop that connection, create that common vision, use the tools of the federal government across departments to make it happen. And in doing that, I think we not only encourage job growth and home ownership, but we also, I think, make a better connection between people and their government, so that governors like Governor Sununu aren't in a position to say, hey, things in Washington are broken. You only have to rely on states and local government. I just don't think that's right. I think there's a lot going on that's positive. We need to do a better job of explaining to people what we do, but we also need to do a better job of actually being on the ground, doing the blocking and tackling that's so important in economic development. We need to do more of that.
I really appreciate that. You talked for a bit about many of the positive, influential things that federal programs are doing, and then I really appreciate the humility of we need to be able to do it better and stronger, fill our role, and then tying it to the partnership elements. Housing Assistance Council, HAC, has been around for 50 years, doing exactly the kinds of things that are in the Rural Partnership Program. That's what we were founded for. We've been doing it in persistent poverty places for our history, and we know the power of local capacity building. The folks, hopefully, who are here at the conference have been touched by that, have been part of our journey, and can attest to exactly what you're saying, that deeper, stronger investments in the capacity of local places is one of the two fundamental things that the federal government has maybe not equitably across its whole geography invested in. The other you raised was access to capital. You have to be able to access the financial resources of this nation if you want to participate in the financial success of this nation. And so if you can speak a little bit more on the capacity building elements and how we do get access to capital, fundamental for housing and community development, I'd appreciate it.
Well, I think there are a number of ways to do this. I think first of all, it starts with making sure that you attract a diversified employment base at USDA. In other words, you attract diversity and inclusion in the people that you're hiring, the staff that you develop, so that people have a connection and understanding of the folks they're dealing with on the ground. USDA, I think, is, we're really making an effort to try to be an incredibly diverse and inclusive place to work. And I think we're attracting some really top-notch talent that can understand and can relate to people who are living in persistently poor areas, because some of these folks have come from those persistently poor areas and understand and appreciate the need to give something back. Secondly, I think it is making sure, again, with that equity lens, that as we look at programs, we take into consideration how difficult it is for persistently poor areas to qualify for these programs. I mentioned earlier the match. I'll give you an example. When we were given the opportunity to make the third and final investment from the Reconnect program, which is the ability to expand broadband in rural remote areas, one of the things we did that hadn't been done before was to carve out a portion of those resources for persistently poor areas, particularly tribal areas, where no match would be required. In other words, you wouldn't have to come up with a dollar for dollar match, because recognizing that communities, particularly tribal communities, may not be able to come up with that match, may not have the resources. And therefore, when you structure a program with a match requirement, you are essentially excluding the very people that you're trying to help here, because they're persistently poor. They don't have access to match, right? I understand it completely, sort of the philosophy behind match. You got to have skin in the game, but if you have no skin, you can't play the game, right? So there are circumstances and situations where your programs have to take into consideration the major challenges that you're creating just in the application process. Then I think it is important for us to make sure that we are paying particular attention to areas that we know where the persistent. I mean, look, we have indexes, we have mapping strategies that will point out the counties that are persistently poor, counties where the poverty rate is above 20% or 30%, or maybe as high as 40%. We know where those places are. And so it's incumbent upon us to make sure that as we are, doing our work, that we're focusing on those places, and that we create innovative and creative strategies to deal with those places. All right. And that's why, for example, rural development has come up with an equity program where they are, they want to learn how to do this, how to do it better. So they're taking 10 communities that they know are very, very poor, persistently poor, and they're basically going to focus real specific attention on those 10 communities. And from that, they're going to learn, this is what works, this is what doesn't work, this is what makes it difficult for somebody to access USDA programs. And the next 10 communities, you make adjustments, you make modifications. And so over time, you begin to understand how to structure your entire program to remove those barriers. We need to look for creative leveraging. When I was secretary before, we had Lisa Mensch basically put together an effort to try to create community development funding entities, CDFIs. And she had an Uplift America, where we basically incented or encouraged the development of these. We've got a single family CDFI pilot that's operating, I think, in South Dakota now, where it basically is creating home ownership opportunities. And so it doesn't have to necessarily be a big program. It can be a small program that's very targeted in a very specific area, where we leverage the resources that are available to create home ownership opportunities. I mentioned the Rural Partnership Initiative. We also have the Rural Prosperity Corps initiative, which is really taking a look at USDA and putting together teams of individuals from USDA and focusing them on those persistently poor areas, making that connection with those community building organizations, places like the Delta, Appalachia, colonious tribal areas where we know poverty is pretty significant. And then, frankly, the last thing I think I would say is that we have to hold ourselves accountable. We have to know that we're actually accomplishing something. So we have to keep track. We have to figure out ways in which we can have data and information that allows us to be confident that we are investing adequate resources, we are investing adequate staffing, we are investing adequate time in these persistently poor areas, and that we're moving the dial, right? We're making investments, we're creating partnerships, we're moving the dial. And so over the next couple of years, we're going to see these programs put into place. We're going to hold ourselves accountable to report. We're going to take a look at the results. And if there need to be changes and modifications, we'll do it. Because at the end of the day, we have to do a better job of penetrating those persistently poor areas with the wide range of programs we have at USDA.
And it is an extraordinarily wide range of programs, lots of elements of what happens in a small town. You can plug dysfunctions in a market or address issues that are being had through USDA programs. And while that a lot of folks who are here at the conference know that when it comes to housing and community development, HUD plays an extraordinarily large role in our world. And while I might prefer and enjoy working exclusively with USDA to have these solutions, the reality is when we're having a conversation about the way federal programs play out across our geography, you can't ignore that programs like the mortgage interest deduction is $70 billion a year, swamps every effort we ever have on developing affordable housing if folks in the persistent poverty places can never take that deduction off their taxes. If Fannie and Freddie are not in those geographies buying mortgages, you're not going to have the liquidity that you need to have a sustainable housing market. There are some real fundamental elements about how the economic geography plays out in a way that I think it was your first answer. You said there might be some folks out there that trust we haven't been getting it right for a long time and extracting wealth from small towns. You know it as a former mayor, the biggest pot of money you got as a mayor was your property tax load. You know that folks who were getting ahead economically, it was oftentimes the value of their house. Well, now we have some of those forces pulling the other direction for several decades. And this administration seems to be walking into that breach and saying, what are the top priorities for rural housing? Well, here's some of them, and we're going to push that wealth for the community, wealth for the individual, and the stability that those programs bring as an administration. So if you could touch a little bit on your relationship to HUD and those programs, some of the priorities for the administration in FY 22, 23, and to come, that would be great.
Well, we've been working very closely with our sister agency on the housing side, making sure that we complement the work that they're doing and making sure that they also understand the wide breadth of programs that are available. To a certain extent, it's a kind of an interesting relationship because HUD is very interested in establishing in urban centers, agriculture, community gardens, and things of that nature. So it's an opportunity for us to sort of say, well, we can help you with that. We've got programs that are designed to provide help and assistance, and in turn, we can make sure that we're not working at cross purposes when it comes to rural or sort of those communities in the middle. We know that the 500 or 1,000 person community is something that USDA sort of understands, but when you get to that 10, 15, 20,000 person community, well, who's in charge here, right? Who's got the equities? And so we want to make sure that we communicate. But at the end of the day, it's really pretty simple in terms of what the priorities need to be in terms of housing. First and foremost, in the context of the pandemic, in the context of the disruption of the economy that we've seen, we got to make sure we keep people in their homes, right? The first order of business is to make sure people stay who have a home, that they're able to keep it. That's why it was so important for us to do what we did in terms of getting our housing assistance resources out, and why it's important for us to continue to put pressure on community, local, and state leaders who have the resources and have the power to help and assist people staying in their homes. When we have states where at one point in the pandemic, only 2 or 3% of the federally supported resources were being put to use, you think, well, wait a minute, guys, why would you want people to lose their home? So first and foremost, keeping people in their house. Secondly, I think that we have to recognize that the rural housing stock is aging, and therefore is probably not the most energy efficient housing stock. And here you have people who are living on very, very tight margins, right? And so they are now being faced with higher energy costs because their home isn't the most energy efficient place. So that's why it's important for the Build Back Better bill that creates resources that would allow us, and the infrastructure bill that's going to allow us to invest and create resources for folks to make their homes more energy efficient, to improve their homes, to lower their energy costs, make it a little bit easier for them to afford to stay in the home, and maybe even fix the place up. And then finally, obviously, we need to continue to work with local leaders to figure out how to make sure that we are creating more affordable housing opportunities. That may involve construction of new homes. It may involve construction of multiple family dwellings, and making sure that as these new homes are being constructed, that families of color in particular have access to them, that they can actually get the financing. I'm real interested in an opportunity that we have to assist first-time home buyers in rural places, first-generation home buyers. This is a terrific opportunity that we have at USDA to use resources that will allow us to say to that couple that's renting, or that couple that wants to move into a community, or maybe that new teacher that's just graduated from college who can't even be thinking about home ownership. Wait a minute, we're here to help you. We're here to provide that banker the guarantee, if you will, that this is a loan that's a good loan to make. So there are a multitude of ways for us to work on these priorities of keeping people in their homes, of improving the quality and efficiency of the house, and lowering the cost of maintenance, making sure that more affordable housing is available, and making sure that people of color have access to the credit and the financing and so forth that will allow them to take advantage of home ownership.
Right. So that's a huge amount of material, right? You guys are busier than ever, putting a lot of initiatives forward. I want to close up our conversation, if I could, with a little bit of looking forward, right? You and I were talking before we got on that I was struggling to get my kids' shoes on this morning and get the school day started and get moving. And yet it's hard to do something like that and not dream about the future and what's it going to be when those kids are in adulthood. And we're doing that a lot at HAC right now. We're in our 50th year. I think we started back when there were Tories and Whigs or something like that, but 50 years of hard work is important. 50 more years of hard work is where our focus is today. And so we've been asking folks to join us in dreaming about what is it 50 years from now? Let's see, 2071. Where are we if our best efforts play out? And then maybe how do we get there?
Well, first of all, it's going to take some really serious advances in medicine for me to get to 2071. So I'm pretty sure I'm not going to be around to see where we are in 50 years. So my time frame is maybe a little bit shorter than that. I think first and foremost, we have this opportunity right now, today, with the infrastructure bill that's been passed, and with the Build Back Better bill, with an historic potential investment in home ownership and in housing. We have an opportunity of a lifetime that would create a pathway to a much more successful 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years for rural communities. If we can get those bills passed, or the Build Back Better bill passed through the Senate, get it through the House, whatever has to get it to the president's desk, have him sign it, and then fully utilize the opportunities that are created from the American Rescue Plan, from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and from the Build Back Better Act to essentially create a new America in rural places. I envision a time when every single home has access to broadband that is actually meaningful. All right, that allows them to be able to conduct their business, to be able to do distance learning, to be able to have access to the finest medical help and assistance without having to travel hundreds of miles. I envision those homes that are built now and in the future they'll be incredibly energy efficient. They will be relying on renewable energy sources that we are able to create by virtue of the Build Back Better and infrastructure program, where folks have their own solar panels. They have power generated that's relatively efficient, very reliable, and also much less expensive, potentially over time, which allows them a little freedom with reference to their paychecks. I envision a period of time where people of color don't have to go through the hoops that they've had to go through, aren't facing the barriers that they faced in the past, and can easily obtain the financing and the opportunity to live in the home of their dreams. That when they see that home and they say, geez, this is the place where I want to live, this is the community I want to live in, this is the neighborhood I want to be part of, this is one I want to contribute back to, I need financing, and that financing is available through a bank that's willing to give them the loan, or a bank that gets a guarantee from USDA or from USDA directly. I envision a period of time that, because of what we can do with this Rural Partnership Initiative, what we can do with the circular economy, that we have bustling, vibrant, small communities with a little manufacturing, with an incredible farming operation that is providing sequestration opportunities, that is converting agricultural waste into a variety of bio-based products, moving us away from our over-reliance on fossil fuels, and creating really good paying jobs, and providing a decent income for farmers so that they don't necessarily have to work 2 or 3 jobs to keep the farm. I envision those communities also servicing local and regional food systems that enable people to have access to delicious food, to nutritious food, to fresh food, in a way that has very little greenhouse gas impact, very little impact on the environment. In fact, is sustainably being produced. I envision an area, rural areas across the country that are innovation centers, where there is just an incredible amount of creativity that has been launched, and that we see a reversal of the out-migration. We see a decline in persistent poverty. We see not an aging population, but a young population. We see appreciation and a connection with these incredibly important places in rural America with urban and suburban America, and that we don't see this division that we currently have today between rural and urban, red and blue, and all of that. That we basically see people working collaboratively together, utilizing the strengths of small communities and large cities to basically create an America that's prosperous for everyone. So I think I may be Pollyannish about this, but I don't think I am. I think when you're looking at the historic nature of the investments that are being proposed and have already been passed, and the opportunities that they create, I hope everybody who's part of this conference gets excited about the opportunities to basically create that kind of future, because it's possible. It's absolutely possible.
Dr. Vilsack, thank you for that hopeful vision for our future. Thanks for recognizing housing as a tool in getting us there. And thank you so much for your time and service. We really appreciate seeing you today. Thank you.
You bet. Thank you.
Good afternoon and welcome again to the 2021 National Rural Housing Conference. I am Shantaria Charleston, Director of Training and Technical Assistance here at the Housing Assistance Council. What an amazing kickoff this morning. Thanks again to Congressman and HAC Board Member Bennie Thompson for the opening welcome. And wow, I am still very mesmerized by Bob Thompson's rendition of Wonderful World. And two, very hopeful and inspired by the priorities around intentionality and equity conveyed by both Secretary Fudge and Secretary Vilsack. We are headed into a brief intermission, but don't go anywhere or keep an ear out. We've got brief remarks by Senators Leahy and Merkley, along with an additional performance by Bob Thompson. And as we wrap intermission, we'll be heading directly into the start of workshops, which begin promptly at 12:45 and again immediately following at 1:45 and 3 p.m. Also on the agenda, you'll see intermissions between those workshop blocks. Be sure to pop back in. We've got other congressional remarks as well as additional entertainment that we hope you'll join us for. And lastly, please be sure to join us here again at 4 p.m. for the closing plenary, The Evolution of Rural America's Diversity. We've got an amazing panel discussion lined up. So off you go. Happy workshopping. I look forward to seeing you around the conference and again back here at 4 p.m.
I want to thank the Housing Assistance Council for hosting this event, and actually to all of you for your dedication to rural housing. And I'm proud to continuously champion rural housing needs here in the Senate. You know, one of the greatest policy challenges we face is making sure that the housing and infrastructure needs of rural America are not forgotten or overlooked. In my home state of Vermont, the majority of people live in rural places. And that includes my wife, Marcia L, and me in our farmhouse on a dirt road just outside of Montpelier. I've dedicated my career in Congress to making sure that when we design and fund programs, they work for everyone. We should all support federal funding for the construction and rehabilitation of housing that's both safe and affordable. And we have to make sure that these programs reach everywhere in the United States, from large cities to small towns run by hardworking people who volunteer their free time to lead. Our greatest opportunity is making housing in rural places affordable and accessible for anyone who wants it. We can keep the rural way of life we all love while welcoming new neighbors and growing our communities. Whether it's communities building the infrastructure they need to support affordable rental housing for seniors, shared equity programs that let families afford their first home, or broadband investments that let us support our current residents and attract new ones, we can make sure that the future of rural housing and rural places is brighter than ever.
Greetings to all of you at the National Rural Housing Conference and a very happy 50th anniversary to the Housing Assistance Council. Senator Jeff Merkley here, and as the former head of Portland's Habitat for Humanity, I believe, like all of you, that quality, stable, affordable housing is a strong foundation for thriving families. I also know that in our rural communities, a low housing supply is increasing not only costs, but missed opportunities for new businesses, jobs, and revitalization. Right now, though, we have a chance to remedy that. The recently passed infrastructure bill will make momentous investments in rural infrastructure, including bridges and roads, and very importantly, rural broadband. And we are on the verge of passing Build Back Better Act, and it's once-in-a-generation investments in rural housing, expanding affordable rental housing capacity, helping families access home ownership, and repairing public and assisted rural housing. These two bills are a great chance, the best chance we've had in a very long time to make progress on rural development and housing. But I'm proposing we do even more. I'm proposing we support the new construction of multifamily housing for lower income families in rural areas through a new National Rural Housing Trust Fund. And that we strengthen USDA's Rural Housing Preservation Program, which helps make affordable housing available in rural communities. With the help and support of all of you at the Housing Assistance Council, we can and we must seize this opportunity to get these bills passed and help with the housing struggles of our fellow Americans. So enjoy the rest of your conference. and congratulations again for 50 incredible years fighting for a decent home in a decent community for every family.
I've got one more for you. I'm going to close with this. This is a piece that was written by one of my favorite jazz pianists, Oscar Peterson. It's called Hymn to Freedom. Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I've really enjoyed playing for you, and I want to wish you much success in the rest of your conference and in all that you do throughout the year. Thank you once again.